I willingly chose for my children to be harmed.
One of the most tragic things my mom has ever said is that she didn't know that she was killing her babies.
They didn't even get a chance to experience love, life, happiness, the comfort of a mother.
Thank you all so much for joining for this conversation. I'm really grateful for you all being here and being willing to share your stories. I'd love to start with you, Katie, to share your story. And if anyone else has other questions as someone is sharing, please feel free to ask.
My husband and I experienced infertility throughout the duration of our marriage. We did adopt our oldest daughter. And then as we attempted to adopt again, that process wasn't as smooth. So we pursued diagnosis and treatment of our infertility, which led to the treatment being offered IVF. And then we have two conceived through IVF.
We also experienced infertility in the beginning of our marriage and decided to just look into IVF, and it was just sort of a very quick process where we decided to go for it. And I have two children out of that, and so that's my experience.
So my parents struggled with infertility as well for a very long time, and they just wanted a baby so bad. And so they ended up being told, their only option was IVF. They worked and worked and worked, finally saved up enough money and were able to do IVF. It was really hard on my mom's body though, and so after one round, she was not able to do it again. So I'm the only surviving out of all my siblings.
Chelsea, can you share your story?
So I'm a blind wife, mother, and pro-life advocate. What really put me on the path to that was finding out very early as a kid that I was conceived through IVF. I think my parents told me before I even understood how babies were conceived in the first place. So it really put me on this research path to understand it and figure out where I came from. And it really just put me in a place to want to advocate on behalf of my siblings that I did lose through the IVF process. I was one of 4 rounds of IVF for my parents. Then on the 4th round, the IVF clinic offered her the option of what to do with the embryos because she didn't know. She wasn't really informed on these issues. And so she chose with my dad to destroy the remaining embryos, honestly not really knowing what she was doing. I feel like I have to say something for those who got left behind.
Katie and Erica, were you conflicted at all about the IVF process before you began it, and what was your experience like with it?
I was just, I think, really uninformed. We didn't know anybody that had gone through infertility. It's the kind of thing where every Sunday I was going to church, everywhere I went in Target, it seemed like everyone was pregnant, and I would just break down crying. And I just thought, why not me? Why can't I get pregnant? And my whole dream since I was a little girl, all I ever wanted to be was a mom. And so you get so scared that you're not going to get that. And there was an IVF clinic nearby, and so we just sort of I guess this is the next step. I knew that it was possible to create extra embryos, but I didn't know how many could be created. And I certainly wasn't given any conversation about the weight of what that would mean and the kinds of decisions I would have to make later. I think I really was just a desperate mom, and I was praying to God, please let it just be, 3 embryos, and I will have 3 babies, and I will go on my way, and it will be all good. But I was more concerned with being able to have a baby than I was of listening to that inner voice, maybe, that was telling me to think twice.
As we journeyed into IVF, we had some reservation. My husband had a little more reservation than I did. But at that point, we had struggled with our infertility, which I didn't really even know was a thing. When we got married and were trying to conceive, so we were desperate and we just suffered in isolation. And there are so many words that you can describe for the cross of infertility that when we pursued IVF, that it was what we wanted. We wanted to share our love with children, and the doors weren't opening any other way. And without support in a different direction, we pursued IVF.
And I'm very sympathetic to that. My mom went through horrible infertility issues. It was so bad that when she was 18, they told her she might as well have a hysterectomy because there was never going to be any hope for her. And so I'm fully aware of how painful that is. I see that in friends who can't have babies. Like it's awful. But I cannot pretend like it's okay for the bad things that are happening in these IVF clinics to continue happening just because they like to hide behind with their marketing team that, well, we're just helping couples have babies, because there's a lot darker things happening in those clinics.
Now that I've become a mother myself and had a baby, gone through pregnancy, I know every stage, I know that it's a life from the beginning. I can't support it. So being conceived of IVF, I feel grateful for my life. I feel so blessed. I really am. But at the same time, there's all those other lives. They didn't even get a chance to experience love, life, happiness, their own children, meeting someone special, the comfort of a mother. And so that's rough, because regardless of, what people want to argue about what development, stage of development is important, they were lives who had a plan. There was a plan for them, and they were deserving to at least have been given a chance.
I think that's one of the staggering things for me to realize as a mom is I willingly chose for my children to be harmed. Like I chose this path. And who does that? And there's not an excuse. It hurts to know that I chose that. It wasn't that something happened to them off the street and I took care of them. It was a choice. And I would say to people out there that you don't want to make that choice for your children. I even grieve for my living children that that's how they were conceived. And I grieve for the children who died in the process, that I put them in that situation where I couldn't take care of them.
It's just saying, please take into consideration the lives that also have to be involved, because it's not so much the fact that, although yes, we're not owed children, it's that the lives that are brought into it in the process, they are not indebted to you to lay down their lives on the chance that these other eggs might implant, or these other embryos might implant. You know what I mean? Because that's all it really is. We fertilize a bunch of eggs for the chance that they might implant, knowing that IVF is so unpredictable, unreliable. And so it's not fair for us to ask of them to lay down their lives for a chance for somebody else, and that's really what it is. But it's never a jab at the mother and father who just want to be parents.
Well, absolutely.
I was just going to say, I think we all have to take personal responsibility for the decisions we make, and I do take responsibility for that, but I also think that this industry is out of control. I think that they don't present all of the information. I think women are walking into this without any idea of the consequences of their actions. They don't actually know what's going on behind closed doors. They don't really understand, like, oh, we're testing and grading these embryos and we're going to give you the best one. Like, we're selecting out like imperfect humans, and that alone is wrong. And I think these conversations, the reason I speak out and I write about this is because I want that to come out of the darkness. Like, if women were fully informed, this would not be happening so much. Mm-hmm. And because the fertility industry is wrapped up in lots of money, you need to go through like a 6-month-long training session to really know what's going on. And so I think we also were blinded by like not having enough information.
I think the conversation around motherhood and fatherhood also needs to be expanded. We hear be fruitful and multiply when you get married, mm-hmm. or, you become parents. And there's a variety of ways to live out motherhood and fatherhood, through adoption, through spiritual parenthood, and just loving on those men and women around you, caring for others. And so I think really expanding that is a call higher than ourselves and our biological parenthood. But you don't always hear about that. And we can also be fruitful regardless of whether we have children.
I love that. That's awesome.
Chelsea and Tyler, you were both conceived through IVF, but you have decided that you no longer support IVF. Can you share what the realization was or the moment was when you decided that you didn't support IVF?
The moment I realized that the IVF industry is destroying embryos on purpose. I think that it's a life when it is biologically recognized at sperm egg fusion, and for some reason in the IVF industry they act like that's not true, even though scientifically it's not even debatable. My body may have been manufactured in a laboratory, but my life was created by God, and people like me deserve to be treated as more than someone else's science experiment. And that's what these IVF labs are doing to these children. They're trying to use words like embryo or transfer to be vague about these details with the mothers, with the fathers, but that's exactly what's happening. I have siblings that were destroyed. I don't think my parents even knew what that meant, because they're being told by the abortion industry, oh, it's just tissue until it's born, and then the IVF industry is just calling them transfers or rounds of IVF. I think it was the phrasing they were using with my parents in the 90s. And what does that even mean? So I think one of the most tragic things my mom has ever said is that she didn't know that she was killing her babies. She had no idea. And I'm so angry on her behalf and women like that. Can doctors just tell women the truth? I know it takes time. I know it takes money and way efficiency, and you can't charge as many units for billing when you slow down and explain to a woman that at sperm egg fusion, a new human being is created with its own DNA that will never be replaced ever. And it's growing the second that sperm egg fusion happens. But you're a doctor, that's your job. I mean, my poor mom didn't even have internet access when she was going through the IVF industry. How was she supposed to know they were lying to her? There wasn't like a book at the library she could check out, like how to vet your IVF doctor before you pick one. And then with this explosion of information that we have access to now, with my interests in these pro-life issues and actually finding out what's going on with these babies, how is a baby created? What does the development look like? You can imagine how horrifying it is to find out what really happened and that you've been lied to about your own babies. I can't be okay with that. I can't support what's happening to these women.
I think with my background in nursing, having heard a lot of conversations between physicians and patients, I don't want to lump every physician in there, but they do think in terms of medical terminology. I have seen lots of conversations between doctors and patients where the patients really don't understand because the doctor is speaking in medical terminology instead of being able to convert it to layman's terms for the patients.
Do either of you still have any embryos that are frozen?
I do not. We made a decision several years ago. We had 4 remaining embryos in cryopreservation, and with a lot of discussion regarding budget, faith, the realization that they were indeed lives. We had always wanted a big family and wanted to try it, and so we transferred the first 2 and miscarried with those. And then the second 2, we went back as quickly as we could to help save them from the freezer as well. And they did not survive the thaw process.
I have 9 frozen embryos. I don't know genders. I don't know anything else about them other than that they're there. And I'm just in like that really unfortunate position of having to decide what I'm going to do now. I mean, there is no decision. Like, they will be put up for adoption. I guess you say embryo adoption. Like, that is the only plan, because I'm not going to destroy them. I'm not donating them to science. But, you know, you guys are talking, just to hear you guys talking about my siblings, like that really breaks my heart, you know, thinking about my kids and their siblings, and like, they're not going to know them. And to think of a child out there someday that looks like my son or my daughter, and like both of my kids look like my husband, I'm like, what if they look like me? You know, these are realities that you have to face when you have these leftover embryos. And I have more than I would have ever even known that you could have. I have to block my emotions a lot. It's so painful to think, like you were saying, like, that I did this. Like, I've been this pro-life advocate for my whole life, and now I'm the one causing pain to children, my own children. Like, I'm causing the need for adoption. I would have never, ever thought that this could be something that was happening to me. And, you know, honestly, even as a pro-life person, abortion is the same thing. If these were to be destroyed, it's the same thing. Destruction has never been an option. Still, I don't know what's going to happen to them. Like, they could unthaw and die. We could have a hard time finding, you know, the adoption stuff. I mean, it's very complicated on that side of things, far more complicated than anyone knows. So this is why I'm speaking out, because I don't want any other mother to have to sit here and decide what's going to happen to her children that she can't have. It's not necessary, doesn't have to happen. And I don't think anyone grasps the gravity of the situation until they're sitting here. You know, I had several years with it's like little babies and kids, and it's like life was crazy. Well, now my kids are bigger, and now I have this mental space to think, oh no, like, what have I done?
I think one of the things I would like to hear from both of you, because I'm going to be having conversations with my own children. You know, we've already started the process of talking to them. They know, you know, our adopted daughter knows she's adopted. Our other kids know they were conceived through IVF, but just, I'd like to hear as a mom, what were your experiences with your parents telling you and how that went for you?
I think one of the best gifts my parents gave me was the truth. I can barely remember the first time I knew that I was conceived through IVF, because they started talking to me about it so early. I think it was brought up even before I fully understood how normal human reproduction occurs. So it just didn't feel weird to me. I think that helped a lot, because I think that when children are traumatized by finding out that they were conceived through IVF, it's not so much that we were conceived differently, it's that their parents lied to them. That's the actual trauma. Because I don't feel inferior to other human beings just because I was conceived in a petri dish. But that's not always the case for some other kids. They can feel very othered. They can feel like they're freaks. And I just don't think that's true. Like, I am just as much a human being no matter how I got here. That doesn't change my personhood. And I think that's the best way to tell children about IVF. And the same thing with adults is to just be honest about it. Let's talk about what's really happening. When we have to get into the actual processes of IVF, it can be a lot more difficult, because I don't think it was easy for my parents to tell me that I have siblings who were intentionally destroyed in the laboratory. And it's honestly a random thing that I wasn't one of them. I mean, I survived because I was part of round 2 and not round 4, where my mom was told not to have any more children and she didn't know what to do. And it's a miracle that I'm here, but we have to talk about the children that aren't here. And trying to cover that up, I think, is just making the problem worse. That's where parents go wrong.
My parents never hid it from me. It was always just kind of, like I said, it was just a detail of my life that we didn't really talk about. And in that aspect, I would say I'm grateful, because it was never something that was a secret. It was never made to be something to be ashamed of. And I don't think anybody conceived of IVF should be ashamed. But I would say the one thing different that I would suggest parents do when they're talking to their kids about IVF is not ignore the humanity. Age appropriate I get, but I think that when you're telling your kids about IVF, I would make sure that they know about their siblings. I wouldn't hide that from them. And we're human, mothers, we're human. We make mistakes, and just explain to them that you didn't know, you didn't want to, have what happened happen, but it did. And just maybe put the emphasis on having respect and honor for the lives of their siblings that aren't here, just definitely don't hide that. That's my advice.
Because it can be really, I know Tyler and I feel like it can be really isolating to be conceived through IVF and have this view on it, because a lot of people will say that those babies are too small to count. And so that can be really frustrating when you're trying to have this discussion, especially with someone who you perceive to be pro-life and to be pro-baby and want these children to be given rights and protections and stuff. And then as soon as you bring up IVF, the humanity's just gone. They
table.
don't see it anymore. And I find that so personally offensive, no matter who it's coming from. Like, I expect my family to acknowledge the humanity of the siblings I have who've been lost, because if they deny their humanity, then they're denying my humanity, because I'm the same thing. I was conceived the same way. So that's why I feel so personally hurt when maybe I'll book a pro-life speech and then I get this little email about it later that says, hey, we love your testimony. We love how you stand up for babies, but don't talk about IVF because those babies are too small to count, and we don't want you distressing anyone with your activism. And it just, how do I not take that personal? Like, you think all the babies matter except for the ones like me? What is that supposed to mean? Like, it makes me feel like I'm a science experiment, or I'm a freak, or I'm an alien. Like, if I'm not a human being, then what am I? And I refuse to be belittled or to have the humanity of my siblings or the millions of babies that have been in IVF clinics to be just diminished by some flippant, inaccurate, unscientific, inhumane comment.
My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and I really thought he was going to die. He didn't, thank goodness. But knowing that I had 10 babies up there in heaven to welcome him provided me the little bit of joy in that. And I was like, that's the silver lining, is they're ready to greet Grandpa. So I'm glad they haven't had to do that yet. But otherwise, it's painful.
Yeah, I've had that, if anyone's familiar with the song, Graves to Gardens. I've been having a lot of really emotional moments about this lately, and it was playing and I was thinking about this, and I just felt like God was saying I'm gonna redeem this situation and take them from this grave of ice to a garden of life. And I don't know how, I don't know how he's gonna make this right, but I can just do the right thing from here on out and trust him in that, and advocate for what I know to be true. So we speak truth like it matters. And so I don't know, like I've said, the rest of my life, it's going to be on my heart. But that's the choice I made. And I have to live with that, so.
I guess just ultimately, Jesus saves. And thank goodness, and that's something that's wonderful too, because just like you said, my siblings are gone. They didn't get to experience all the wonderful things I've experienced, but they're up there and they're happy and they're loved, And I think that's really the thing to remember is yes, what happened was wrong, but he makes everything okay. And I think, for us, just like I had said in the beginning, like we have been given the gift of life. We've been blessed with so much. We've been blessed with this platform. We've been blessed with this opportunity. And I truly believe that's just like he says, I give unto you so that you will give unto others. And I think that's what we're doing. I hope that we can inform. So at the very least, if people still decide to go through with IVF, we can say, at least you knew. At least we did everything we could to let you know.
I really struggle with how to talk to moms dealing with infertility or those who are post-IVF about the dangers that are happening in these laboratories. I want to be sensitive. I want to be their friend. But I also I don't want to spend my life and my relationship with these women pretending like I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know that their children that they had frozen in a laboratory were real. But I also don't want to hurt them. I have friends going through the IVF process right now. And I don't know what to, I can't stop what's been done. I don't want to make it more painful for these women by just exposing them to all the science and all the truth and all the ethics, but I don't want to sit silently by while people like me are almost exterminated in these laboratories at the numbers that they're being destroyed. It's insane. It's overwhelming. It's so many of them. Some of them are being destroyed just because they're disabled like me. And I don't know how to talk to these women. Because these are my friends.
I wish somebody had said something to me before. Like after it was done, like at that point, like there's nothing. But like if it's on the before side, I wish somebody had. I don't know if I would have been open to it. I might have shut them down because I didn't want to hear it. But there are people in my life I know that knew that I knew they didn't agree. And I look back and I think I wish they had really lovingly taken me aside and said something, like, and they didn't. So, and if you do that and they reject you, you've done what you can do if you said it in love. I think that's a really important part of it. So that's what I would say.
I think loving first is most important. We had people tell us, that it was not right. Nobody knew how to support us alternatively. So being willing to walk the journey with your friends, asking, how can I support you? Being willing, if you're having a baby shower, to be okay with them not being there. Or say, hey, I know this is hard on you, because it is. And how would you like for me to proceed? I think having the conversation, asking questions, support, just like we all need support as moms, as women from other women. But sometimes we have to ask for it. Asking them, hey, I know you're experiencing this. What are you thinking about this? Do you have a concern about that? Versus pushing it like, do you know that so-and-so many embryos are abandoned?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about this? That's got to be a lot to deal with and understand.
Thank you all so much for your courage and your love and being willing to have this conversation. It's very powerful.
Thank you.